and welcome to Around the Towns. I'm your host, Dan Murphy, and this episode I took a tour of Bully Boy Distillers, a Boston distillery with roots in Sherborne, as well as interviewed Gary Beach, author of the U.S. Technology and Skills Gap. He's a Sherborne resident. So without further ado, let's get started with my tour of Bully Boy.
I'm Will.
And I'm Dave.
We're Bully Boy Distillers. Dave and I opened up shop Bully Boy Distillers. We were Boston's first craft distillery. We opened up about 3.5 years ago here in the Newmarket district in Boston. It was sort of fulfillment of a lifelong dream of first having our own company, and second of all, doing something that we love, which is making spirits.
Okay, so how did you guys get into this then?
So we grew up obviously on a farm in Sherborne, and there was about 100 apple trees on the farm. And so as kids, we would make cider. We'd make cider, jams, jellies. We had an ice cream stand. We loved doing sort of crafty things. You know, it wasn't as trendy back then. It wasn't called craft. We just liked making things with our hands. And as we got older, we went from making cider to making hard cider, and then if you heat up hard cider, you end up with apple brandy. So the genesis of all of this was making apple brandy in a small 2-gallon still at the farm in Sherborne. And Will and I both went on to do other things. We had separate careers, and then we circled back in 2009 was when we really started moving forward with the application process, because there are a lot of licenses you have to get to do this, obviously. And then, we started distilling in Boston in 2010.
Basically, the distilling process, the manufacturing of spirit, of liquor, is really divided into 3 separate steps. And the first step we call mashing, which is when you're just mixing water with whatever raw ingredient you're choosing to make, whatever raw ingredient you're using that day. We're using molasses for our rums, and we're using a variety of grains for our vodka and our whiskeys. So this is really the heart and soul of the operation. On the right here we have our still, which is what we use to actually produce the alcohol. And on the left we have our mash tank, which is what is step 1, where we mix up either the molasses or the grains with water. And that noise you're hearing right now is steam. We heat both of these instruments with hot steam, which is produced in a big boiler behind this wall. The reason we do that is steam is a great indirect heat source. It's not like an oven or a stove, which would have direct heat and might burn the contents. This is really nothing more than a big mixing bowl. It's 300 gallons, and the still is 150 gallons, so the math works out well. This is exactly twice the size, so we can do 2 batches at once. And depending on what kind of spirit we're making, will determine how hot we get the water. So if we're doing a grain-based spirit, we'll heat the water to about 200 degrees because it needs to be that hot in order to extract the starch from the grain. And the starch is the base that we then convert to sugar, and the sugar is really what we're after. That's what the yeast will eat. If we're doing molasses, it's very easy. We only need to heat this to maybe really 100, 120 degrees. Enough to sort of help the molasses dissolve in the water. And there's a big propeller, basically, a mixer on the bottom of this tank. We use a 3 horsepower engine that fires that thing around. So you can imagine it's pretty strong, and that helps agitate and mix everything together. So this will be step 1, and once this step's complete, we'll pump the contents out through the bottom using an impeller screw pump into the fermenters, which I showed you earlier. Those stainless steel tanks where it'll sit for about 5 days fermenting. And then step 3 is the still.
So what's the origin behind the name Bully Boy?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So Bully Boy was the name of a farm workhorse. Our great-grandfather owned a horse named Bully Boy. He was the original owner of where we grew up in Sherborne. And he was a big fan of Teddy Roosevelt, who had the expression "bully for you," I mean, good for you. And so he named his horse Bully Boy, and Dave and I thought it was a nice way to sort of tie our love of distilling back to the farm where this horse came from.
example, have you always sort of looked at it as a family business somewhat?
It's certainly.
Yeah, I mean that's a big part of it. I mean, we've been lucky enough to come from a family that really gets along well and works well together. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't be thrilled to have to spend 8 hours with their mother doing packaging, but we love it. You know, that's one of the perks of the job, is getting to hang out with her and getting to hang out with Will. That was a big part of starting this business was working together.
And our dad's been a big supporter too. Don't leave our dad out.
How many people do you employ? Like, how large is your business?
So we have 2 full-time folks that help us out. One of them, Charlie Jacob, actually is another Sherburne resident, where his parents are. And then we have sort of a revolving door of family and friends. Our mother comes in once a week. Dave's father-in-law comes in once a week. And in aggregate, it has a really profound impact. It really helps us, you know, it's really helped us through our startup phase. We're looking to grow, but for right now, that's sort of the team.
And then sort of how do you sort of anticipate demand for this?
It's a really tricky one. Yeah, especially with the barrel-aged spirits, which need, you know, at least 2 years to sit. How do you kind of anticipate your pipeline? And we've been growing, you know, at 40 to 50%, so we kind of use that as our baseline going forward, and hope that we can meet those goals. And if we exceed them, then we'll figure that one out. You know, it's a good problem to have. We divide the space. We've got 3,500 square feet that we rent here in Boston's Newmarket district, and we divide the space basically into storage on one side and then processing on the other. So we're standing in our storage area where we keep our raw ingredients, and then obviously our barrels. And our 2 primary ingredients are grains and molasses. So I have behind me 50-pound bags of hard red winter wheat, of which we're just about out, as you can see. We get this shipped down to us about 100 bags at a time. It usually comes every couple weeks. And then we have our molasses sent to us in 300-gallon plastic totes, of which this is a reused one. We're storing some vodka in here right now. And the basic process is to mix up, if we're going to do a rum, for example, about 45 gallons of molasses with 150 gallons of water. And that whole process starts on this side, where we'll use the forklift and we'll pick up the molasses tote and dump it into the mash tank. And then step 2 occurs in these stainless steel fermenting tanks. This one's been wrapped in sort of our makeshift insulation, and that's because it's a little bit cool. Obviously, the winter months, this warehouse we have a tough time keeping much above, 55 degrees, and so the yeast during the fermentation likes to live around 90 degrees. So we wrap these with insulation. But in here is a mixture of molasses and water that's been sitting here. I believe this is about 4 days old at this point. And during this process, what you're going to see is the yeast is consuming the sugars in the mixture of water and molasses. And as it consumes those sugars, it converts them to alcohol. So after about 5 days, the yeast will have consumed all the sugar, and then consequently dies off. And this is ready for step 3, which is distillation. So there's step 1's mashing, step 2's fermentation, and step 3 is distillation. This is basically a 150-gallon. A really simple way to think about it is it's sort of like a 150-gallon copper pressure cooker. And so the bottom portion that is wrapped in stainless steel is actually filled with hot steam right now, and the copper portion is heating up. You can see right now it's about 20 degrees Celsius, so it's still pretty cool. We're going to heat it to about 80 degrees Celsius, which is close to 200 degrees, before alcohol starts getting produced. So it takes about 45 minutes to an hour to kind of get it up to temperature, and then that's when it'll start to boil. And when the contents of the still, which today we're doing rum. So right now there's 150 gallons of fermented molasses water mixture in that pot. As that starts to boil, it's going to give off a vapor, and that vapor is going to consist of primarily water, and then about 8 or 9% alcohol. And as that vapor rises, it's forced out a pipe. You can see it's that stainless steel pipe to the right-hand side. So as the vapor rises, it's eventually forced out this pipe right here. And this pipe enters the column. And this is really where the proof of the spirit is determined. I mentioned before, we start with the contents being about 8 or 9% alcohol. As the vapor rises through this column, by the time it reaches the top, which is about 15 feet up, it'll be at about 80% alcohol. The way that happens is the spirit passes through 8 separate rectification chambers, and each chamber has what we call a copper plate. It basically looks like a frisbee, and the frisbee has the effect of cooling the vapor. Alcohol boils at about 212 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm sorry, water boils at about 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Alcohol is about 178. So what happens is the plate will cool the vapor below 212 so that water is condensed into a liquid form, but it won't cool it all the way down to 178. So the alcohol stays a vapor and rises into the next chamber. The alcohol turns into a liquid and falls down. That happens 8 times because there's 8 chambers in this column, and the net effect is to strip a lot of the water out of that vapor, and you end up with a vapor that's 80% alcohol after starting with an 8 or 9, call it 8% alcohol. So it's a pretty profound impact, obviously, on the vapor, on the product. And if we're making a rum or a whiskey, that'll be the end of the line. The vapor is funneled into our condenser, which is over here, and that is this stainless steel tube, which is filled with cold water, and the cold water cools the vapor, turning it back into a liquid, which you'll see in a few more minutes will start coming out as alcohol. If we're doing a vodka, we'll put the vapor through another 8 plates, so it'll go through 2 separate columns. The reason for that is with vodka, the definition for vodka in the U.S. anyways is a tasteless, odorless spirit. So it has to be very neutral. In order to achieve those qualities, you basically need to strip out pretty much everything out of the vapor. You need to have like very, very little water. And so we actually distill it to 190 proof, or about 95% alcohol, only 5% water, as opposed to the whiskeys or the rums, which we distill it to about 80%. Doesn't sound like too much of a difference, but there's a really profound impact on the flavor. And then with the vodka, the same thing. It'll eventually go through the condenser, where we collect it, and we'll cut it down with water, and eventually bottle it.
And then do you kind of rotate through your various types of alcohol in this?
Good question, yes. So the nice thing about this still, this piece of equipment here, it's very flexible in its use, and that's by design. As a small startup distillery, we have to be able to adapt to the marketplace. We can't really just put all our eggs in one basket. This still can make all these different kinds of spirits, so we'll literally make rum one day, and we'll make whiskey the next.
What was the decision to brew these types of alcohol?
I think I don't want to speak for Dave, but sort of as a small business craft brand, there's a balance in everything you do, which is your artistic ambition with sort of the business realities. So rum and whiskeys are something that we're very passionate about. And we felt with the vodka there was an opening in the market for something that was a well-made, crafted vodka. So with each of the spirits, it was something that we felt we were passionate about, but also that we felt was marketable.
So what's the best way that people can try your alcohol?
Thanks for asking. We're carried in close to 600 bars, restaurants, and liquor stores in Massachusetts. And Sherburne Inn has our stuff, so it's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, this Sherburne Wine and Spirits, Sherburne Out. We actually have a link on our website that shows by town the stores and restaurants that carry our products. We also do tours in the distillery as well.
My thanks to everyone at Bully Boy. Now let's take a look at my interview with Gary Beach, author of the U.S. Technology Skills Gap. He's a Sherborn resident, and the book is about many of the problems education is facing today.
My name is Gary Beach. I'm publisher emeritus for a technology magazine called CIO, which stands for Chief Information Officer, and I'm also the author of this new book called the U.S. Technology Skills Gap, which in essence is a short history of math and science education in America over the last 100 years, kind of chronicling some of the things we did right, some of the things we did wrong, and what we have to do for the future if we want to remain competitive. Our country wants to remain competitive and innovative as we move forward.
Okay, so where do you kind of begin with this discussion?
I start in 1909, America, and in that time, that age, we kind of think of Silicon Valley in the 20th century, 21st century being very innovative. But even back in 1909, things like Henry Ford's Model T and lots of movie things, there were lots of innovations going on at that time. But at that time, from 1909 to 1934, the percent of high school students in America who took algebra, trigonometry, what have you, calculus, dropped dramatically. My take is, researching the book for 6 years that I did, Americans have just never really embraced math and science as something that's important or relevant to them.
Even with all these technological increases, do you feel that way?
Yeah, absolutely. In the 21st century, reading literacy was table stakes to get a job. Now it's proficiency in math and science. We're sitting here, you and I, in January 2014, and there's 11 million Americans unemployed, yet there's 4 million open job postings in our country because employers can't find the people with the skills that they need to compete.
Okay, so what do you think could be done to sort of meet that gap?
Well, we have to acknowledge we have a problem.
Okay.
And we've never done that in America. We talked about 1909, but it really starts to accelerate in the 50s and 60s where we start seeing benchmark studies that Americans are falling behind, and people talk about it for a couple of weeks and they put it in the dustbin to be forgotten forever. And Winston Churchill once said, errors of procrastination are followed by errors of consequence. And if we don't, as a country, recognize we have a problem, we're gonna hit an era of consequence sometime, in my opinion, between 2020 and 2030.
How can we get people to pay more attention to this problem?
People are paying attention, but they're paying attention in different ways, and everybody has a different point of view. And what happens is, what is happening here, there's this acknowledgement that performance in international math and science tests has a direct correlation to economic growth, employability, and increasingly national security. But everybody's got a different point of view on it. So we had No Child Left Behind as being the mantra from 2002 to now. Now the teachers here in Dover-Sherborn are dealing with a thing called Common Core, as if No Child Left Behind wasn't hard enough. I mean, again, talking about it from a national lens. You and I were talking off air before we came on. This is kind of an anomaly here in Dover-Sherborn. Massachusetts is the best state in the country, and if Massachusetts were a country, it'd probably be 5th or 6th in the world in terms of math and science. So we're doing a pretty good job in Massachusetts, and in Dover-Sherborn, as you were mentioning, has one of the best high schools in the entire country, and in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Dover-Sherborn school system is perennially ranked in the top 5. So we're doing something right here, but across the country, 65% of high school kids are not proficient in math and science. Everybody knows the No Child Left Behind moniker on a program, but that's simply a name given as Congress reauthorizes what was originally called the Elementary Secondary Education Act, ESA. So for a long time we've been investing in impoverished areas, but how the system has just become diluted. Back when President Johnson put this ESEA Act in, to qualify for elementary secondary education funds, Title I, all this other stuff, a town, a city had to document that at least 40% of its people were under the poverty line. So what has happened in the nearly 50 years since that bill was originally passed in 1965 is now it's down to 2%. And what has happened is that it's just been different iterations over the years by politicians and presidents and Congress people and what have you, all want a pot of this money. And there's a misperception, when I started the book, I had a misperception on this, that the federal level is a big funder in public education in America. Ain't so. Only about 5% of public education funds in the United States come from the Fed. By far, the biggest is you and your parents and my family paying state and local taxes. That's about 95% of. So it's very much finance for public schools is very much local.
So at least in this town, our money seems to be well spent, but that isn't necessarily the case in other communities.
But the other issue we didn't talk about here today is parental involvement. Mm-hmm. What we're very fortunate here in Dover-Sherborn is parents are highly engaged in their children's education. And to the point you were raising a couple of moments ago about others who are less fortunate, a lot of those kids are single parent families. I mean, it's very, very difficult. We're lucky, but it's parental involvement is key.
What are the benefits to helping out these less fortunate communities, and sort of what are the problems? Because I imagine that some of those benefits might take quite a while to develop. I mean, it takes 12 years or plus to get through the school system. So what are the incentives to do it now when it might create competition?
Well, see, it gets back to the point I was trying to raise earlier. If you're sick, you have to admit you're not feeling well. Mm-hmm. And America's never really said we're sick when it comes to public education or all these other issues that we've been talking about here on the program, in my opinion. Yeah. They'll come out and say, okay, but no one has then said, all right, let's get everybody together here in the tent and say, in 10, 15, 20 years from now, here's where we want to go, regardless public, Republican, Democratic. This is going to be the national, that was number one strategic recommendation I made in this book. We need a long-term national education strategy that transcends politics. If we as a country made a decision right now, whenever we're viewing this on broadcast here in Dover-Sherborn, that we want to make educational excellence a national priority, I am convinced it would take America 20 years or longer to get to that point, and then you have the question of, does our country have the patience? I don't think we do.
If we invest time and energy into this and we don't see immediate results, I feel like we've gotten to a point in which we want immediate gratification. And how do we continue to inspire people to invest in these programs when it seems like in the short term it might be a lot of work for nothing?
Well, you talk about you bring up an issue that I really would like to address because I think it's an important one that's in the book. Is if you look at the U.S. Constitution, there's about 4,600 words. There's not one word that says educate or education. Lots of well-intentioned presidents, President Reagan, President Bush I, President Clinton, President Bush II, President Obama, have all had well-intentioned ideas on what we should do. We talked about in this conversation the long-term national education strategy that I think we desperately need. By long-term, I'm talking 20 years or more. Mm-hmm. Last time I checked, the Constitution only allows Dan Murphy to be re-elected once. Right. So at most, we have a long-term national education strategy that's 8 years. I didn't particularly answer your question, but I wanted to get that in, that it's all local. It's very, very important, and we have a long way to go till we fix this problem. But the number one issue in my mind is acknowledging as a country that we could do a little bit better here, a lot better. Yeah. People go, you're being too pessimistic, and I argue, I'm not being pessimistic. I'm not being optimistic. I'm trying to be realistic, and that's what the story of the book is. Here are the facts, and getting back to the long-term goals that we have to set and meet as a country if we want to continue to innovate and invent. Is we have to continue to hire, and we do it here well at DS. Across the country, though, we need to hire the very smartest kids out of college to become teachers. One of the things our country can be very proud of is we've had a rich history of innovation and invention. But what has happened is that our economy has lived off, in my opinion, of the intelligentsia in the top 5%. What some of these global tests are showing, unfortunately, over the last 10 years, is the percent of American students who are in the fifth quintile, the highest quintile in these international studies, has dropped by 40%. And that worries me. So there's a lot of things going right in here in terms of, we have this culture of entrepreneurism. You look at the scores for Japan in terms of the test scores, they're way up here. Mm-hmm. The entrepreneurial capacity in the Babson London Business School for Japan is way down here. Then you go all the way out to the other side, and the American test scores are here, but the capacity for young Americans like yourself to innovate and invent is way up here. So the question before the House, as we go forward in 2030 or a little bit sooner, is what's going to be easier to fix? Is it going to be easier for cultures like Japan and South Korea and Finland and others in China to learn how to become entrepreneurial? Or is it be easier for America, who has this culture of entrepreneurism and innovation and invention? It will be easier for our country to keep that and embellish that and then just do a better job in trying to raise our test scores.
How do you reconcile the facts with some of the technology? Or can we use technology to make things better? Or are we?
I'm very excited about leveraging technology, particularly in the whole aspect of education. Mm-hmm. And here in DS, because you went through the school system. Both of my kids, Scott and Noel, went through the school system years ago. So I'm pretty familiar with what's going on here in terms of how computers came in and what have you. And I believe in 1998, Noel, my daughter, she had it was a remarkable class called the Virtual High School, someplace up in Concord, Mass. And her teacher was in Singapore. So what's happening now? College education is getting so expensive. You're hearing more and more now about this aspect of at elementary school, K-12, the Khan Academy. Sal Khan coming up with this program where it's 9 minutes. Kids can log on after school and help in terms of do work on math and science, and it's really wonderful. 6,000 vignettes, and now what you're seeing is these things called MOOCs, massive open online courses, and what these are is professors, college professors, and they thought maybe 3,000 kids around the world would sign on. Well, 154,000 signed on, and the professor's going, "Oh my God, how am I going to, answer the questions the students might have?" Well, you don't have to worry about that because the students, the peer kind of thing, answered their own questions. But the MOOCs are critiqued because out of 154,000, only 7,000 actually completed the class and got accreditation. It's not accreditation, but a certificate saying they did. 7,000 people completed the class. There's not 7,000 undergrads at MIT.
Why should people get your book?
Okay.
Why should they read it?
So the book is not about technology skills like how do you do Java programming, C++, how to build a website, all these other things. It's about the state of education in our country and how important it is to our future. So if people are interested in how we got to the point we're at, why are American kids 36th in the world in math? Why are we 28th in science? Why are we 23rd in reading? We spend over $700 billion every year on public education, by far the most of any country in the world. We should be getting a better return. My premise in writing the book was American kids are not performing well, not because of genetics, not a genetic issue. I try to connect the dots going back to 1909 as we started this conversation. And the chapters are, it's not like a novel where you pick this book up and you have to go to page 51 or to start and then you stop. And you can pick up any chapter in this book. So if parents are interested in the state of education in our country and what are some of the challenges and what are some of the consequences, frankly, if we don't get this right, they'll enjoy, I wouldn't say enjoy is the right word, they'll find the book interesting and relevant to those points.
My thanks to Gary Beach and everyone at Bully Boy. My name is Dan Murphy, and you're watching Around the Towns. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next episode.